Hello, friend. Welcome to Stories for Snoozing. If you enjoy calm stories to help you drift to sleep, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps others find us too. Now, settle in, relax, and let's begin our story. The sea had a way of keeping its own hours, and the old lighthouse learned them all. At dawn, it listened. At noon, it watched. And when evening folded the horizon into a single blue line, the light prepared its quiet vow. It would keep the night kind. Jonas had tended the tower for years, a gentle man with hands the color of rope and salt. He lived in the keeper's cottage below the lantern room, where everything was simple and in its place. A wooden table, a kettle, a chair by the window that faced the harbor. Each morning he climbed the iron spiral with an oil can and a cloth, greeting each step as if it were an old friend. He spoke to the glass as he wiped it clear. He spoke to the brass as he polished it warm. He spoke to the light most of all, which needed no language to understand him. On fair days, fishermen waved from their small boats. On rough days, they did not wave. But Jonas waved anyway, his hands steady against the gale. He kept the ledger by the desk, where he wrote the weather and the wind, the tides and the birds, the small ceremonies by which a coast remembers itself. The book had become a second shoreline, a place where time left its shells. In the evenings he lit the lamp. He never hurried the match. He let the flame learn the wick, the oil, the glass. And then, with a quiet breath, he opened the lens and sent the beam turning over the water like a blessing that never tired. People in the village said the light had personality. Children claimed it blinked when they laughed. Old sailors said it grew brighter when storms were near, as if it could smell danger far off, like rain before it falls. Jonas believed the light carried memory, not his alone, everyone's. The beam swept the bay and returned with stories. A gull's lonely art, a family on the night ferry holding each other's hands, a captain studying charts by a lamp that made its face look gentler than daytime ever would. The light saw them all, then turned, then saw them again, faithful as the tide. The promise he kept began years before, on a winter night when the sea wore a hard iron skin. He had been new to the post then, still learning which boards creaked out of habit and which creaked to complain. The storm arrived like a page torn from a large book. Snow came sideways. Wind laid its long hand on the roof and pressed. The lantern glass hummed with a thin, high sound that made the teeth ache. The radio coughed and went quiet. The cottage shook. Out beyond the reef, a bell buoy tolled with an exhausted bravery. Jonas climbed into the lantern room and checked the flame. He fed it, shielded it, spoke to it as if he were speaking to a living thing, and perhaps he was. Time thickened. The sea rose and fell as if it were trying on different sizes of itself. Near midnight, through ice and breath, he thought he saw a shape, low in the water, too far inside the shoals. A fishing boat? A shadow? Another shape answered with a pale blink, then vanished, then blinked again. Jonas turned the lens and widened the sweep. He knew the chart by heart, where the teeth of rock waited, where the channel curved like a question, where hope would steer if hope still had a hand on the wheel. He kept the beam steady, slow, unafraid. The storm did what storms do. It tested every line, every knot, every seam in the world. The lighthouse did what lighthouses do. It held its one true line. Hours later, when the wind finally untied itself from the shore, The radio found its voice. There had been a Mayday. A small boat had gone blind in the snow and followed the light back through the channel. Two aboard, cold, shaken, alive. The next day the captain came with a thermos of coffee and a silence that meant more than any words. He stood at the base of the tower, looking up, as if watching a prayer finish its work. When he finally spoke, his voice was the sound of a knot being cut. "You kept it burning." Jonas nodded. He did not say, "I promised." That night, alone in the lantern room, he made the vow out loud. "I'll keep it," he said, "for whoever needs it. I'll keep it." The light answered the only way it could, by turning again, by finding another mile, by writing itself across the water like a steady hand. Years passed in a language of tides. The ledger filled and was replaced, then filled again. Children grew and left messages in the visitor's book, saw the light blink. It blinked back. Couples wrote their names on a single line, as if vows could be practiced here where promises were native to the air. In late autumn, when the days shortened, as if someone were pulling gently on the hem of the evening, Jonas began to notice his steps. They had become the steps of an older man. He was not bothered by this. Age, like weather, is something you learn to sail. One evening a letter arrived with a postmark from far away. He opened it at the table, where the kettle made its slow, familiar prelude to the boil. The writing was neat and careful. "Dear Keeper," it began, "you don't know me, but my father spoke of your light. He said it was a voice that never shouted, but always reached him. He's gone now. I'm coming to the village to see the place he loved. If there's a day you can spare, I'd like to climb the tower and thank the lamp." Jonas turned the paper over and read it again. He set it by the ledger and looked through the window at the quiet harbor. Somewhere a gull lifted, then changed its mind. He felt the night begin. He lit the lamp as he always did, slow and sure. When the beam found the water, he felt the past rise like a tide that had been waiting just offshore. Not to take, only to join. He set a second cup on the shelf by the stair. The visitor came on a soft day, the kind of day the coast keeps for itself. A scarf, a careful smile, a small bouquet of wild roadside asters carried like a question. Her name was Mira. They climbed together, the iron steps ringing gently under their feet. Jonas paused at the landings, not to rest, but to let her see what there was to see. The harbor in its blue bowl, the crooked row of sheds that made a sentence only fishermen could read, the long reach of the point, with its spine of rock where cormorants dried their wings like dark flags. In the lantern room, he showed her the lens. The glass was a patient geometry. Prisms nested in prisms, a cathedral of angles that turned a single flame into a tireless traveler. He drew a cloth across the brass until it remembered the sun. Mira stood with her hands loosely folded. "When I was little," she said, "my father would take me out at dusk. We'd row until we could see the flash. He said the light had a heartbeat, and if we were very still, we could feel it through the oars." Jonas rested his palm against the frame. "It does," he said. "Not mine, not yours. The coast's." She nodded, and the nod carried years. They spoke the way strangers do when something larger than words has already introduced them. She told him about a house with a porch that faced west, and a shelf with jars of screws and sea glass, and a workbench that never minded the mess. He told her about a ledger that kept more than numbers, and a bell buoy that tolled even in its sleep, and a window that had learned every shade of morning. "Why did you keep it?" she asked at last. "All these years?" Jonas looked out across the water where a late boat made a careful line toward home. "Because it kept me," he said. "Some promises are like that. You make them once, and they make you again and again." They lit the lamp together before sunset, letting the flame grow from whisper to word to sentence. When the lens began its slow turn, he stepped back and watched the beam write itself into dust, a handwriting he could have recognized with his eyes closed. Mira placed the asters in a chip blue jar and set them by the window. The petals seemed to gather the light and hold it gently, as if flowers knew how to remember. Down below, the kettle sang its sure song. They descended, poured tea, and sat at the small table where the ledger kept company with the letter. Between sips, Mira traced her finger along the faint grooves, cut by years of pencils. "Do you ever think of leaving?" she asked, not as a test, but as a kindness, the way you ask if someone wants a warmer coat. "Sometimes," he said, "when the wind forgets my name. Sometimes when the steps count me more slowly than I expect. But then the light turns, and I remember what I promised, and who I had promised it for." Who? Anyone, everyone. The ones who think they're alone on the water. The ones who aren't lost exactly, just not found yet. Night arrived like a good listener. The beam made its rounds. Far out by the bell buoy, a white sprinkle lifted, then fell, the sea practicing its cursive. Jonas wrote the weather in the ledger. Mira watched his careful hand and understood that the writing was part of the keeping. When she stood to leave, they climbed once more to the lantern. The room held that special hush a lighthouse knows when the world below forgets to hurry. Mira rested her fingertips against the glass, not to claim it, but to thank it. "My father said the light blinked," she said with a quiet smile. "He said, if you blink back, it answered." Jonas considered this, then lifted his palm and shaded the flame for a breath, just enough to let the beam soften and return. They watched it sweep the water, patient as ever. Mira laughed the way people laugh when something old is made new right in front of them. On the steps, she turned. "Keep it," she said, and he heard his vow return to him in another voice. "I will," he answered. After she was gone, Jonas washed the cups and set them to dry. He carried the blue jar to the lantern room and placed it on the floor beside the pedestal, where flowers could learn the light from the source itself. The asters would fade as all bright things do, but while they lasted, they would be a small, honest sunrise inside the night. Toward midnight, the wind freshened. Clouds thickened their weave. He checked the fuel, tested the vent, listened to the faint, clean burn of the flame. The radio murmured far-off voices and then grew shy again. Somewhere out in the dark, a horn sounded twice. Not alarm, acknowledgement. Jonas stood very still and felt the reply travel from the lamp, through the glass, across the water, into that unseen wheelhouse where a pair of tired hands would steady and settle. Two notes back, a conversation older than charts. He thought of promises, how they begin like a match, small and brave, how, tended, they become a fire you can stand beside when the weather is unkind, how even after you, they go on, because the work was never only yours. Just before dawn, he opened the door and stepped onto the narrow gallery that circled the lantern room. The air had the kind of cold that teaches clarity. He could smell kelp, iron, and the faint sweetness that means morning is almost here. To the east, a seam of pale gold unstitched the night. He watched until the beam paled, and until the sea turned the color of forgiveness, until gulls wrote their sharp little signatures along the edge of light. When the sun at last rose, he turned down the flame and let the glass rest. Down the stairs, across the room, the ledger open, the pen ready. He wrote, "Dawn clear, wind north, northwest, gentle, light kept." Then he set the pen aside and without thinking set a second cup on the table, a habit that had found him and would stay. He poured tea and the house breathed a small, satisfied breath. Out on the water a boat moved toward the day. The lighthouse as ever kept its quiet promise, and the promise as ever kept him. Thank you for listening to Stories for Snoozing. I hope our story helped you unwind and rest a little easier. Until next time, sleep well.